The day began like any other, mundane, predictable, a rhythm I had settled into over the past 15 years. The coffee machine hummed in the background as I typed away at my computer, answering emails and setting up meetings. It was the usual office buzz, filled with the low murmur of conversations, the occasional ring of a phone, and the distant hum of the copier. But then, something unusual caught my attention. A conversation between two colleagues in the break room, just loud enough to reach my ears. Pierced through the monotony of the day, I heard Kate's been spending a lot of time with Tom. One of them said, her voice a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place, maybe a hint of scandalous excitement. Yeah, I've noticed it too, the other replied. They're always together, sneaking off to those quiet corners. It's pretty obvious, don't you think? My fingers froze over the keyboard. For a moment, I was sure I had misheard them. My wife, Kate. The woman I had spent the last 15 years building a life with. Raising our children with? My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel the blood rushing to my face. But I forced myself to stay still, to listen. The two continued, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. It's not just lunches, one of them said. I saw them leaving the office together the other day. And you know how Tom is, always charming, always finding ways to get close to people. Kate's been different lately, the other mused. More secretive. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more going on. I couldn't take it anymore. I abruptly stood up, knocking over my coffee in the process. The hot liquid spilled across my desk, but I barely noticed. My mind was spinning, trying to grasp what I had just heard. Kate and Tom. The words played over and over in my head, each repetition making my stomach churn with a mix of disbelief and anger. I hurried out of the office, my footsteps echoing loudly in the hallway. I needed air, space to think. Anything to clear the fog that had suddenly descended on my thoughts. Outside, the cool breeze hit my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing, but the conversation replayed in my mind, each word twisting the knife deeper. How could this be true? Kate had never given me any reason to doubt her. We had our ups and downs like any other couple, but we always worked through them. She was my partner, my confidant, the mother of my children. The idea of her being involved with someone else, especially someone from her office, was inconceivable. And yet, the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was quickly taking root. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that it was just idle gossip, nothing more. But the words had felt too real, too specific. And now, every little thing Kate had done over the past few weeks started to replay in my mind. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the sudden need for space. I had dismissed them as the usual stresses of work, never once considering there might be something more. But now I couldn't ignore it. The suspicion gnawed at me, a relentless ache that wouldn't let go. I had to know the truth. I couldn't live with this shadow hanging over me, over us. But the thought of confronting Kate terrified me. What if the rumors were true? What if everything I believed about our life together was a lie? I shook my head, trying to clear the dark thoughts. No, I couldn't jump to conclusions. I needed to be rational. To find out what was going on before I let this poison my mind and my marriage. But as I stood there, the chill of the morning air biting into my skin, I knew one thing for sure. Life as I knew it was about to change, and there was no going back. After that day, the seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to shake it off, it continued to grow. I began to pay closer attention to Kate, watching for any sign that could confirm or dispel the unsettling rumors I'd overheard. And soon enough, I started to notice things I had previously brushed off. Kate had always been dedicated to her job, but lately, her work seemed to consume her completely. She would leave early in the morning and come home late at night, often with the excuse of meetings running over or last-minute projects that needed her attention. At first, I believed her. After all, we were both professionals who understood the demands of a career. But now, with the lingering suspicion in my mind, those late nights started to feel less like dedication and more like avoidance. Then there were the phone calls, hushed conversations that she would take in another room, her voice barely above a whisper. Whenever I would ask who she was talking to, she would brush it off, saying it was just work or a friend from the office. But something about the way she would quickly end the call whenever I walked into the room made my stomach twist with unease. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that this was just the stress of work getting to both of us. But every time I looked at Kate, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me, something lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly normal life. The confirmation I dreaded came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up at the office, my colleague John stopped by my desk. We had always been friendly, shared lunches, the occasional after-work drink, but the look on his face that day was different. There was a heaviness in his eyes, a reluctance as if he was about to deliver bad news. "Adam, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. "Sure, what's up?" I replied, trying to keep my tone casual despite the unease creeping into my gut. John hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "It's about Kate," he said finally. The mention of her name sent a jolt through me. I nodded, urging him to continue, though part of me didn't want to hear what was coming next. "I saw her the other day," John began, his voice steady but serious. "She was with Tom, her boss, right? They were in one of the quieter areas of the office, kind of tucked away from everyone else." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the dread that was settling in my stomach. "And?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They were close," John continued, carefully choosing his words. "Too close, if you ask me." I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the way they were acting, it didn't look like just a friendly conversation. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean, too close?" I asked, needing him to spell it out, even though I already knew what he meant. John sighed, clearly uncomfortable. They were whispering, looking around like they didn't want anyone to see them. And, well, Tom had his hand on her arm, kind of lingering there. "It just didn't seem right, Adam. I thought you should know." I stared at him, feeling like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. Every instinct told me to defend Kate, to tell John he was mistaken, that there had to be some other explanation. But the look in his eyes told me that he wasn't just gossiping, he was genuinely concerned, trying to be a friend. "Thanks, John," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. He gave me a sympathetic nod before walking away, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. I sat there for a long time, the office around me fading into the background. The doubts that had been gnawing at me for weeks now felt like a gaping wound. Raw and exposed. Kate. Tom. The words circled in my mind, each repetition bringing a new wave of nausea. I had wanted to believe that it was just office gossip, nothing more. But now, with John's confirmation, the reality of the situation began to settle in. Kate was hiding something from me, something that could destroy everything we had built together. And I was no longer sure if I could stop it. I couldn't let it go on any longer. The doubt, the suspicion, it was eating me alive. Every time Kate looked at me with those same loving eyes, I wondered how much of it was real. How much was a lie? I knew I had to confront her, lay it all out, and hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, I could barely touch my food. My mind was elsewhere, consumed by the images John's words had painted in my head. Kate, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, chatted about her day, the usual talk of work and the kids. But I could barely hear her over the pounding of my heart. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I put down my fork and looked at her, really looked at her. "Kate, we need to talk," I said, my voice strained. She glanced up, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "What is it, Adam? You've been quiet all night." I took a deep breath,
trying to steady myself.
I heard something about you. At work. Kate's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a forced calm. What do you mean?
She asked, her tone cautious. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. But there was no turning back now. People are talking, Kate.
They're saying that you and Tom, that something is going on between you two.
For a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, fear?
Guilt? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by indignation. What?
That's ridiculous, Adam. Who told you that?
Does it matter? I shot back, the frustration bubbling over. I just need to know if it's true. Are you seeing him? Is there something you're not telling me?
Kate's face flushed with anger. Of course not. I can't believe you'd even think that, Adam.
Tom is just my boss, nothing more. How could you accuse me of something like this? But as she spoke, I could see the cracks in her composure. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too defensive.
It was subtle, but I knew her too well to miss it.
This wasn't the reaction of someone completely innocent.
I wanted to believe her, desperately. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and tell me that it was all a misunderstanding and that we were okay.
But instead, all I felt was a gnawing sense of dread.
You're lying, I said quietly, almost to myself. Kate's eyes flashed with anger and something else, panic, maybe?
I'm not lying. How could you think that?
Adam, I love you. I love our family. I would never. But her words rang hollow in my ears. The more she denied it, the more convinced I became that there was something she wasn't telling me. Something she was hiding.
Then why are you acting so strange?
I demanded, my voice rising.
Why are you always on the phone, taking calls in the other room? Why are you spending so much time at work?
And why the hell would John say he saw you with Tom if nothing was going on?
Kate shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes.
I don't know why John would say that, but it's not true. Adam, you have to believe me. But I couldn't.
The doubts had taken root, and no matter how much I wanted to pull them out, they had already poisoned everything.
That night, after the argument, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling.
Kate had fallen asleep eventually, or at least she pretended to. But I couldn't find any rest. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was her with Tom, hidden away in some corner, whispering secrets and lies.
The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. My mind wouldn't stop torturing me with images of what might be happening when I wasn't around. The thought of Kate with another man, sharing the intimacy that was supposed to be ours alone,
made me feel sick.
I tried to push it away, tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was jumping to conclusions.
But the fear was too real, too suffocating to ignore.
Our kids were starting to notice too.
They could feel the tension between us, the way I would snap at the smallest things or the way Kate would retreat into silence.
I saw the confusion in their eyes and the way they looked at us as if trying to understand what was wrong. It broke my heart, knowing that they were caught in the middle of something they couldn't possibly comprehend.
But what could I do? The more I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Every time Kate was late coming home, every time she picked up her phone, my mind would spiral into darker and darker places.
Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I would lie awake, listening to the quiet of the house, my thoughts racing, my heart pounding. And all the while, that nagging voice in the back of my mind kept asking the same question.
What if it's true? What if everything I thought I knew about Kate, about our life together, was a lie?
I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming, something that would shatter our lives forever. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. I couldn't take it anymore.
The lies, the uncertainty, the gnawing doubt that had consumed me, none of it was bearable.
I needed the truth, even if it destroyed me. So, I made a decision that I never thought I'd have to make. I would follow Kate, and find out once and for all if my fears were grounded or just a cruel trick of my imagination. It was a Friday evening, and Kate had mentioned she'd be working late.
My heart pounded as I waited in my car outside her office, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they turned white.
I felt like a stranger in my skin, like this was something a desperate, paranoid man would do, not me. But here I was, hiding in the shadows, waiting to confirm the truth.
After what felt like an eternity, I saw her emerge from the building.
She wasn't alone. Tom was with her.
They walked side by side, talking quietly, too close for comfort.
I felt a sharp pain in my chest as I watched them. I knew Tom only as a name, a shadowy figure in my nightmares, but seeing him in the flesh, so close to Kate, made it all too real. I followed them at a distance, trying to stay out of sight as they made their way to a small, cozy restaurant a few blocks away. It was one of those places that seemed designed for intimacy, dim lighting, private booths, the perfect spot for secrets. I parked my car and hesitated for a moment, my heart racing as I debated whether to go in. But I had come this far, there was no turning back. I entered the restaurant quietly, keeping to the shadows as I searched for them. They were seated in a corner booth, tucked away from the main dining area as if they were trying to hide from prying eyes. My stomach turned as I saw them leaning in close, their heads together, speaking in hushed tones.
They looked so comfortable with each other, so familiar. The way Kate smiled at him, the way she touched his arm lightly as she spoke, it was like I was watching a different person.
The woman I knew, the woman I loved, had never looked at me that way in years. My world shattered at that moment. All the doubts, the suspicions, the sleepless nights, they all came crashing down on me as I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching my wife with another man. 15 years of marriage, of love,
of shared dreams and memories, all seemed to dissolve into nothingness.
I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the air had been sucked out of the room.
My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the spot. The betrayal was so raw, so overwhelming, that I didn't know how to process it. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, a nightmare where everything I held dear was ripped away from me.
I must have stood there for minutes. Or maybe it was just seconds, I couldn't tell.
Time seemed to stretch and blur as I watched them. Every laugh, every touch, every shared glance between them felt like a dagger in my heart.
Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and stumbled out of the restaurant, my vision swimming with tears I refused to let fall. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it did nothing to numb the pain coursing through me. I made it back to my car somehow, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely get the keys into the ignition. As I sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard, everything started to sink in. This was real.
This was happening.
Kate, my Kate, had betrayed me.
The woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children, had turned her back on everything we had shared.
15 years. 15 years of love, of commitment, of sacrifices and joys. And now, it all felt like a lie. My mind replayed scenes from our life together, our wedding day, the births of our children, the quiet moments we had shared over the years. But now, every memory was tainted, corrupted by the knowledge that she had given herself to someone else. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, numb with shock and grief. Time lost all meaning as I tried to process the enormity of what I had just witnessed. Part of me wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against the injustice of it all. But I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, hollowed out and broken, as the weight of Kate's betrayal pressed down on me like a crushing force. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, a whirlwind of anger, pain, and disbelief. I couldn't even think about what I would do next. The only thing I knew for certain was that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I had known, the future I had imagined, had been ripped away from me in that dimly lit restaurant. As I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, I felt a deep, aching emptiness settle in my chest. My home, the place that had always been my sanctuary. now felt like a stranger's house. I was no longer the man I had been just a few hours ago.
That man was gone, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone lost and adrift in a sea of pain.
I stumbled through the front door, my heart still pounding from the emotional wreckage of the evening.
The house was too quiet, too still. Every corner seemed to echo with the weight of my newfound reality.
I knew I couldn't stay here alone with my thoughts. I needed to talk to someone.
To ground myself in reality, to somehow numb the pain that was consuming me.
My first call was to John, my old friend and confidant.
His voice on the other end of the line was a small comfort, a thread of normalcy in the chaos. When I told him what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear him processing the shock, the same disbelief that had crashed over me like a tidal wave. "Adam, I'm so sorry," he finally said, his voice low and steady.
"You need to get out of the house.
"Get some fresh air. Let's hit the bar.
It'll be good for you."
Just a chance to blow off some steam.
I hesitated for a moment. The idea of leaving my empty house felt foreign, almost impossible. But John's words were a lifeline, a chance to escape from the crushing weight of my emotions, if only for a few hours. I agreed, and within the hour, I found myself driving to our favorite pub, the one where we used to share stories and laugh away our troubles. The bar was dimly lit and loud, filled with the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation.
The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the emptiness I had felt all evening. As soon as I walked in, John spotted me and waved me over to a corner table. His face was etched with concern, but there was also a determined look in his eyes. He was ready to help me through this. We ordered drinks and settled into the booth, and John wasted no time in steering the conversation away from the topic that was consuming my thoughts.
He told stories from work, cracked jokes and regaled me with old tales from our younger days. For a while, I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, and it was a strange, almost painful relief.
The alcohol did its job, dulling the edges of my pain, and giving me a reprieve from the storm raging inside me. As the evening wore on, the conversations grew more relaxed, the laughter more genuine.
It was like I was slowly peeling away from the suffocating reality that had settled over me.
John was a master at distraction.
He knew exactly how to pull me out of my head, and for a few hours, I was able to forget, if not completely, then at least partially. We talked about everything from sports to music to absurd conspiracy theories.
John's unwavering support was a balm for my wounded soul, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this.
But even in the distractions and laughter, there were moments when the truth would slip through.
I'd catch myself staring into my drink, lost in thought, the image of Kate and Tom flashing behind my eyes.
Each time, John would notice and steer me back. Never pushing too hard, but always keeping me grounded.
By the time the night was drawing to a close, I felt a little more human, a little less broken. The weight of the world wasn't entirely lifted, but the crushing pressure had eased just enough for me to breathe. I was grateful for John's presence, for his ability to help me find some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. As we left the bar, the cool night air hit me like a splash of cold water.
It felt invigorating, almost refreshing.
John gave me a reassuring pat on the back, a gesture that spoke volumes more than words could.
"You'll get through this, Adam," he said, his voice firm and steady. "You're stronger than you think. And you've got friends who care about you." I nodded, feeling a pang of gratitude and sorrow. "Thanks, John. I needed this."
The drive back home was quieter, but the silence was different this time.
It wasn't oppressive, it was contemplative. I felt a little more ready to face what lay ahead. A little less overwhelmed by the storm that was brewing inside me.
As I walked through the front door, I was met with the same emptiness that had greeted me earlier, but it didn't feel quite as suffocating. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of hope, an understanding that, even in the darkest times, there were small moments of relief, and that I didn't have to face everything alone. The days that followed were a blur of disjointed emotions and uneasy silences. The once vibrant hum of our household had been replaced with a cold, palpable distance. Kate's attempts to bridge the chasm between us were obvious and, to me, painfully transparent.
She tried to strike up conversations about our routine, our plans, anything to re-establish some semblance of normalcy.
But each time, her efforts felt hollow, like a well-intentioned but ultimately futile gesture. I was keenly aware of the way she watched me, her eyes searching for any sign that I might be willing to listen, to forgive.
I saw her attempts at casual conversation morph into desperate pleas for attention, as if her presence alone might somehow mend the rift between us. She would leave little notes around the house, cook my favorite meals, and try to rekindle the small rituals we once shared.
But none of it could penetrate the fog of disbelief that had settled over me. Her voice, which once held warmth and affection, now carried a strained edge whenever she spoke.
"Aren't you going to eat anything?" she'd ask, her tone feigning casual concern. Or, "How was your day?"
A question that felt more like an obligatory formality than a genuine interest.
I would respond with monosyllabic answers.
My detachment a stark contrast to her increasingly desperate overtures. What hurt the most was not the fact that Kate had betrayed me, but that her attempts to restore our relationship felt so insincere. The trust that once bound us was shattered beyond repair.
Every smile, every affectionate gesture was tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal.
It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a side of her I could never unsee.
Our children, oblivious to the full extent of what had transpired, sensed the tension between us.
They asked questions about why Mom and Dad weren't as close anymore, and why our family nights were less frequent.
I could see the worry in their eyes, the confusion as they tried to reconcile the happy memories of the past with the strained atmosphere of the present.
Their innocent inquiries pierced through me with a fresh wave of guilt and sadness. They didn't deserve this upheaval, and yet, they were caught in the crossfire of our crumbling marriage. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Kate approached me cautiously. "Adam, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes were red, her expression a mix of pleading and resignation.
I could see the exhaustion etched on her face, the weariness of someone trying to hold on to something that had slipped through their fingers. I looked at her, feeling a pang of sadness mixed with anger. "What is there to talk about, Kate?"
I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've been through this.
I can't just forget what happened." "I know," she said, her voice breaking.
"But I want to make things right. I want us to work through this."
"I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I shook my head. "It's too late for that."
"I don't believe anything you say anymore." "How can I?"
"You've already shown me who you are."
Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of genuine sorrow.
"I'm sorry, Adam. I am. I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know you're sorry," I said, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable.
"But sorry isn't enough. Not this time." She didn't respond, and the silence that followed was heavy and charged.
I could see the resolve in her eyes waning as she turned away and walked back to our bedroom.
The distance between us was no longer just emotional. It was physical, a chasm that separated us in every sense. As I stood there, alone in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation.
The home that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a prison.
A constant reminder of what we had lost. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, struggling to balance the pain of betrayal with the responsibility of being there for our children. It was becoming increasingly clear that repairing our relationship was an impossible task. The trust had been broken beyond repair, and every attempt to rebuild it only served to reinforce the depth of the fracture.
The reality of our situation was settling in, and with it came the painful acknowledgement that our marriage was irrevocably changed.
The days after our conversation were filled with a heavy, oppressive silence.
I spent long hours alone, sorting through the shattered fragments of our life together, trying to make sense of it all.
The house, once a symbol of our unity, now felt like a battleground of unresolved emotions and unanswered questions. I knew that I needed to make a decision, and it wasn't one I could delay any longer. It was on a chilly, gray afternoon that I made up my mind.
The decision was both painful and liberating. I had decided to file for divorce.
The weight of the choice felt like an anchor, dragging me down into the depths of sadness and finality.
I could no longer ignore the fact that our marriage, once the cornerstone of my life, had been irrevocably damaged.
No amount of remorse or promises could undo the betrayal that had fractured our trust. The paperwork was a bureaucratic nightmare, but it was a necessary step toward reclaiming my life. As I sat at my desk, filling out the forms, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. This was not the end I had envisioned, nor was it the path I had hoped to walk.
Yet, it was the only path that made sense, given the circumstances.
When I finally handed over the divorce papers to my attorney, a sense of finality settled over me.
I had taken a step I could never undo. It was the beginning of the end, and there was no turning back.
Later that evening, Kate approached me with a look of stunned disbelief.
She had sensed the shift in our dynamic, and the sight of the divorce papers in my hands only confirmed her worst fears.
Her eyes were red and swollen, a clear sign of sleepless nights and relentless worry.
"Adam, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the documents.
Her face was a portrait of despair, a stark contrast to the anger and defiance she had shown in previous conversations.
"I'm filing for divorce," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore, Kate. The trust is gone."
"I don't believe you anymore." Her expression shifted from shock to desperation.
She took a step toward me, her eyes pleading. "Please, Adam.
Don't do this."
I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'm willing to end things with Tom.
"I'll do whatever it takes to make this right.
We can fix this, I swear."
I shook my head, feeling a pang of guilt as I saw the raw pain in her eyes. "It's not that simple."
"It's not just about Tom. It's about everything that happened.
The trust we had, the foundation of our relationship, it's all been destroyed."
"Adam, I'm begging you," Kate said, her voice breaking. "I love you. I want us to be a family again. I'm ready to end it with Tom and work on us.
"I'll do anything you ask." Her words were a desperate plea, but they felt hollow. The promises she made now seemed like empty words, too little, too late. "Kate, I can't just forget what happened. It's not something I can overlook.
I need to move on and try to rebuild my life."
She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands.
I could see her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight was both heart-wrenching and reinforcing. I had hoped that my decision would bring clarity and closure, but instead, it seemed to deepen the sense of loss that was already overwhelming me. "I'm sorry," I said softly, though the words felt inadequate. "I truly am.
But this is the best decision for both of us.
I need to focus on moving forward and doing what's best for me and the kids."
Kate looked up, her face streaked with tears, but there was an undeniable resignation in her eyes.
She knew, as I did, that there was no going back.
The decision had been made, and the process was set in motion. As much as it hurt to see her like this, I also knew that continuing down this path was not going to heal the wounds we had inflicted on each other. The divorce papers were filed, and the journey toward separation began. It was a painful step, but one I felt was necessary for both of us to find a semblance of peace and a chance to start anew.
The process would be difficult, but it was the only way forward from the wreckage of what had once been our life together.
The calendar had flipped to the end of October, and the air had grown crisp with the approach of winter.
It was a season of endings and transitions, and as I drove home from work one evening, a sense of finality hung heavy in the air.
What I didn't expect was a gesture from Kate that would push the finality of our situation to its breaking point.
When I walked through the front door that night, I was greeted by an unusual silence. The house seemed eerily calm, and the absence of the usual hustle and bustle felt unsettling.
As I made my way to the living room, I noticed a faint aroma of lavender and candles flickering in the dimly lit space. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. Kate appeared from the kitchen, dressed in an elegant, soft blue dress, her makeup carefully applied. The sight was almost surreal. Her eyes were hopeful, but there was a tinge of sadness in them that I couldn't ignore. "Adam," she began, her voice soft but resolute. "I've been planning this evening for a while. I wanted to show you that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The table was set for two, adorned with a white tablecloth, fine china, and a bottle of our favorite wine. The atmosphere was intimate and inviting, designed to rekindle what we once had. It was a scene that spoke of romance and nostalgia, a last-ditch effort to save what had been lost.
"Please, sit down," Kate urged, trying to keep her composure. "I've prepared a special dinner for us. I want to talk about our future, about how we can fix this." I sat down at the table, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. Her effort was evident, but so was the pain and betrayal that had driven us to this point. I watched as she poured the wine and served the meal with a delicate touch, her hands trembling slightly. As we began to eat, Kate tried to keep the conversation light, reminiscing about happier times and speaking about our children and their needs. She spoke with sincerity, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was hurting, and so was I, but for different reasons. "Adam," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know I've made mistakes, and I understand if you can't forgive me right now. But I need you to know that I'm willing to end things with Tom. I want to work on us, to rebuild what we had. I miss you. I miss our family." Her words were desperate, a plea for a second chance that seemed both heart-wrenching and inadequate. I had already made up my mind about our future. The betrayal had cut too deep, and the wounds were still too raw. "Kate," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I appreciate the effort you've put into this evening. But it doesn't change what's happened. The trust we had is gone, and it's not something that can be easily repaired. I've already decided to move forward with the divorce." Her face fell, and the hope in her eyes was quickly replaced by resignation. "Adam, please," she begged. "I love you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Can't we at least try? Can't we give it one last chance?" "I can't," I replied, shaking my head. "The damage has been done, and it's too much to overcome. I need to move on. I need to focus on my healing and our children." The conversation drifted into silence, the weight of the decision hanging heavily between us. Kate's attempts to salvage our relationship had been sincere, but they had come too late. The finality of the situation had set in, and there was no turning back. The evening was a poignant reminder of what we had lost and what could never be regained. After dinner, Kate and I sat together for a while, the silence punctuated only by the soft crackling of the fireplace. The once warm and comforting space now felt cold and distant. As I left the house that night, the finality of the situation was undeniable. Kate had given her last attempt, but the reality was that our paths had diverged irreparably. The romantic evening had been a final, heart-wrenching effort to rekindle something that had been extinguished. It was clear that no matter how sincere the attempt, the betrayal was too profound to forgive. The decision was made, and our relationship had reached its inevitable conclusion. The days following the romantic dinner with Kate were a blur of emotional turmoil and contemplation. Despite my decision to move forward with the divorce, my thoughts were increasingly consumed by our children. They had become the center of my universe, and their needs and feelings weighed heavily on me. Every afternoon after work, I found solace and purpose in spending time with them. We resumed our old routines, family dinners, movie nights, and trips to the park. I threw myself into their lives, determined to be the supportive and present father they deserved. Their laughter and energy became my sanctuary, a balm for the pain I was feeling. The kids were perceptive, sensing the shifts in our family dynamics. They noticed the tension, the absence of their mother's presence during our activities, and the changes in our daily lives. Despite their concern, they were fiercely supportive of me, rallying around me with a strength that both comforted and broke my heart. I don't want you to go.
Dad, my eldest daughter, Emily, said one evening as we watched a movie together.
We need you here. Her words struck a deep chord. I could see the worry in her eyes, the confusion about why things were changing so drastically. I reassured her with a hug, promising that no matter what happened, I would always be there for her and her siblings.
My commitment to them was unwavering, and I was determined to make our new reality as stable and loving as possible.
Meanwhile, Kate continued to try to reconcile. She called frequently, left messages, and even showed up at the house unannounced on a couple of occasions.
Her attempts to rekindle our relationship were persistent and heartfelt.
She wanted to talk, to work things out, and to understand the finality of my decision.
One evening, Kate arrived at the house with a bouquet and a heartfelt letter.
She had taken the time to write down her thoughts and feelings, hoping to convey her regret and her desire for reconciliation. She wanted to show me that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right.
As she handed me the letter, her eyes were filled with both hope and desperation.
Adam, please, she said softly.
I know I've hurt you beyond measure, but I want you to know how truly sorry I am.
I want to make amends. Can we at least talk about it one more time? I took the letter and read through it carefully.
Her words were sincere, filled with remorse and a deep longing for forgiveness. But even as I absorbed her heartfelt plea, I knew that the wound was too deep to heal. The betrayal had left scars that could not be erased.
And the trust that once bound us together was irreparably broken.
Kate, I said, returning the letter to her. I appreciate everything you've done to show that you're sorry, but I can't undo what's been done.
I've come to terms with the fact that our relationship is over.
I'm focused on being the best father I can be for our children, and that's where my energy needs to be directed right now. Her face fell, the hope in her eyes fading into resignation.
I understand, she said quietly, her voice trembling.
I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything.
I nodded, accepting her apology but knowing that forgiveness would not change the course we were on.
As Kate left, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. The door had closed on our relationship, and the path forward was clear. In the weeks that followed, I continued to pour my heart into being present for our children. We worked through the challenges of our new reality together, finding strength and comfort in each other. Their support and love were a constant reminder of what truly mattered, and they became my guiding light through the darkness. Kate's attempts to reconcile had been heartfelt, but the damage was irreversible. The betrayal had left a permanent mark, and while I could offer forgiveness, I could not forget. The focus now was on building a new life with my children, ensuring that they felt loved and secure despite the changes.
The journey ahead would be challenging, but with my children by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The day had finally come.
I sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of me, each page a reminder of the end of a chapter that had once been full of promise and love. The signature lines were waiting, a final formality to complete the process of closing a significant part of my life. My heart was heavy as I picked up the pen, but the decision to move forward was clear.
The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but the clarity I had gained over the past months made it evident that this was the only path left.
With each stroke of the pen, I felt a mix of sorrow and relief, knowing that I was taking control of my future and creating a new beginning for myself and my children. The signing ceremony was understated. I had asked Kate to come by one last time so we could finalize everything with as much dignity as possible.
We met at the house, where I had set up a small table in the living room. The atmosphere was subdued, marked by the finality of our decisions and the weight of what had transpired.
Kate entered, her face pale and tired.
The months of trying to reconcile had taken their toll on her.
She greeted me with a nod and a weak smile, clearly aware of the gravity of the moment.
"I'm here," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I'm ready to sign." I gestured for her to sit across from me. As we both took our places, I could feel the tension in the room. The years we had spent together, the ups and downs, the memories we had made, all of it was coming to a close in this simple,
formal act. We reviewed the documents one last time, ensuring that everything was in order.
The finality of our decision was palpable. I glanced at Kate, who was staring at the papers with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Are you sure this is what you want?"
she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, my own emotions barely in check. "It's not what I want, Kate.
"It's what needs to happen."
We've both suffered too much, and I need to focus on what's best for our children and myself.
Kate nodded, tears welling up in her eyes.
I understand. With that, we each signed the documents, marking the end of our marriage. The act was both liberating and heartbreaking. As I handed the papers back to her, Kate's hands trembled. She collected them with a finality that echoed the end of our journey together. "I wish you well, Adam," she said, her voice breaking.
"I hope you find happiness."
"Thank you," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside.
"I wish the same for you."
As Kate left the house, the weight of her departure settled over me.
The finality of the divorce was a significant milestone, and while it was accompanied by a sense of loss, there was also a profound relief in knowing that I could now focus on rebuilding my life.
In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in creating a new routine for myself and the children.
We explored new activities, established new traditions, and found joy in our daily lives.
The journey ahead was uncharted.
But it was filled with potential and hope. The end of my marriage was a painful chapter, but it was also the beginning of a new one. With each day, I found strength in the support of my children and the hope for a better future. The pain of the past will always be a part of me, but I was determined to move forward with resilience and optimism. As I looked around our home, now a place of new beginnings rather than old memories, I felt a renewed sense of purpose.
I was ready to embrace this new chapter with an open heart.
Knowing that, despite the challenges, I was making the right choice for myself and my family.